The wind cut through the valley like a blade, carrying with it the bitter scent of snow and something else, the sharp edge of judgment. Marcus Reed stood in the parking lot of Hanson's General Store, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his worn field jacket, watching the townspeople of Timber Falls whisper behind cupped hands and pointed fingers. His German shepherd, Ranger, pressed against his leg, a wall of muscle and loyalty between Marcus and a world that had already decided what he was worth. Nothing. The cabin sat 3 miles up Coldwater Ridge, a heap of rotting timber and shattered dreams that everyone in Timber Falls knew about and no one wanted. The realtor had called it a fixer-upper with potential. The town called it a death trap. Marcus called it the only thing he could afford with the $1,200 in his checking account, the last of his savings after 2 years of floating between VA hospitals, cheap motels, and the back seat of his truck. He'd bought it sight unseen at a county auction for $800. The entire town had watched him raise his hand, watched the auctioneer's gavel fall, watched him sign papers with fingers that still trembled from old injuries and older memories. And then they'd watched him walk out into the cold November air with a deed to a property everyone knew would kill him before winter ended. Damn fool, someone muttered from the porch of the general store. Marcus didn't turn around. He'd heard worse. In Fallujah, in the VA waiting rooms, in the eyes of his ex-wife's lawyer when the divorce papers were signed. Words were just noise now, background static to the constant hum of survival. Ranger's ears flicked toward the sound, but the dog didn't growl. He'd been trained better than that. 6 years as a military working dog had taught him to assess threats with precision, to distinguish between real danger and the petty cruelty of people who'd never known what it meant to hold a dying friend in your arms while mortars screamed overhead. Marcus reached down and scratched behind Ranger's ear. The dog leaned into the touch, eyes never leaving the parking lot, scanning, always scanning. "Let's get supplies and get out of here," Marcus said quietly. Inside the store, the fluorescent lights buzzed like angry wasps. The aisles were narrow, crowded with dusty cans and faded boxes that looked like they'd been sitting there since the 1980s. Marcus grabbed the basics: canned soup, instant coffee, batteries, a box of nails, tarps, duct tape. Everything he'd need to make the cabin livable enough to survive the winter. At the counter, Betty Hansen rang up his purchases with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd been doing the same job for 40 years. She was 70 if she was a day, with silver hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that had seen too many winters on the mountain. "Heard you bought the old Pritchard place," she said, not looking up from the register. "Yes, ma'am. That cabin's been falling down since before you were born. Roof caved in during the blizzard of '03. Foundation's probably rotted through by now." Marcus pulled out his wallet. "I'll manage." Betty finally looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression softened. "You got anyone helping you up there?" "Just me and Ranger." She glanced down at the dog, who sat perfectly still beside Marcus, tail wrapped around his paws. "That's a fine animal. Looks like he's seen some things." "We both have." Betty was quiet for a moment. Then she added an extra box of matches to his pile and didn't charge him for it. "Winter comes hard up on Coldwater Ridge. Radio says we're due for snow by the weekend. You got enough food." "I'll be fine." "Stubborn," she muttered, but there was something almost approving in her tone. "You remind me of old Thomas Pritchard. He was stubborn too. Died up there alone, stubborn as the day is long." Marcus paid in cash, gathered his bags, and headed for the door. Behind him, he heard Betty call out, "You need help, you come back down. Don't be too proud to ask." He paused at the threshold, one hand on the door. "Thank you, ma'am." Outside, the sky had darkened to a bruised purple. Snow was already beginning to fall, light flakes that drifted down like ash. Marcus loaded the supplies into the back of his pickup, a 1998 Ford that had seen better decades. Ranger jumped into the passenger seat without being told, settling in with the practiced ease of a dog who'd ridden in far worse vehicles through far worse conditions. The road up Coldwater Ridge was barely a road at all, more like a suggestion carved into the mountainside by optimistic loggers a century ago. The truck bounced over ruts and rocks, the suspension groaning with every impact. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tight, focusing on the narrow beam of his headlights cutting through the gathering dark. Ranger's breathing was steady, rhythmic, a counterpoint to Marcus's own racing heartbeat. The dog had a way of calming him, of pulling him back from the edge when the flashbacks started creeping in. The therapist at the VA had called it grounding. Marcus called it survival. 20 minutes of climbing brought them to a clearing where the trees opened up just enough to reveal the cabin. Marcus killed the engine and sat in the silence, staring at what he'd bought. "Jesus," he whispered. The cabin looked worse than the photos. The roof had collapsed on the left side, exposing blackened rafters to the sky. The porch sagged like a broken jaw. Windows were shattered, their frames hanging crooked in the walls. The entire structure leaned to one side, as if the mountain itself was trying to push it over the edge of the ridge. Ranger whined softly, a sound Marcus had learned meant uncertainty. "Yeah, buddy," Marcus said. "I know, but there was nowhere else to go. No family to take him in, no friends with spare rooms, no money for rent in town. This pile of rot and nails was home now, and Marcus Reed had learned a long time ago how to make do with what he had." He grabbed his flashlight and stepped out into the snow. Ranger followed, nose immediately going to the ground, tracking since Marcus couldn't even imagine. The dog moved in a wide circle around the clearing, methodical, checking perimeters the way he'd been trained. Marcus approached the cabin slowly, testing each step on the porch before committing his weight. The wood groaned, but held. The front door was missing entirely, just an open mouth of darkness that exhaled cold air and the smell of decay. Inside, the flashlight beam revealed devastation. Furniture lay scattered and broken, covered in years of dust and animal droppings. The collapsed section of roof had let in rain and snow for years, rotting the floorboards until they looked like black sponges. In the corner, a rusted wood stove sat cold and silent. Ranger entered cautiously, each paw placement deliberate. The dog's ears were pinned back slightly, not in fear, but in focused attention. He moved to the far right corner of the main room and stopped, nose working the air. "What is it?" Marcus asked. Ranger didn't answer, just kept sniffing, then turned to look at Marcus with an expression that said clearly, "Something's here." Marcus swept the flashlight across the corner. Nothing but more rot, more damage, more evidence that he'd made a terrible mistake. But Ranger was rarely wrong about these things. If the dog sensed something, there was something to sense. "All right," Marcus said, more to himself than the dog. One step at a time. He spent the next hour clearing enough space to set up a basic camp. He dragged the broken furniture outside, swept the worst of the debris into piles, and laid down tarps over the sections of floor that looked most solid. In the corner opposite where Ranger kept returning to sniff, Marcus set up his sleeping bag and camp stove. By the time he finished, full darkness had fallen outside. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees, and the snow was falling harder now, building up on the edges of the collapsed roof. Marcus heated a can of soup on the camp stove and shared it with Ranger, the two of them eating in silence while the wind howled through the gaps in the walls. "First night in our new home," Marcus said, trying to inject some optimism into his voice. Ranger licked the last of the soup from his bowl, then returned to the corner he'd been investigating earlier. The dog scratched at the floorboards once, twice, then looked back at Marcus. "Not tonight, buddy. Whatever you're smelling can wait until morning." But Ranger scratched again, more insistently this time. Marcus sighed and grabbed the flashlight. He walked over to where Ranger stood and knelt down, inspecting the floorboards more closely. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just the same water-damaged wood that covered the rest of the cabin. But then the light caught something. A faint seam in the boards, almost invisible under years of grime, running in a perfect rectangle about 3 feet by 4 feet. A hatch. Marcus's pulse quickened. He ran his fingers along the seam, feeling for a gap, a handle, anything. The wood was swollen from moisture, the boards pressed tight against each other. But in the corner, where Ranger's nose pointed, there was a small indentation, just big enough for fingertips. "You found something, didn't you?" Marcus said. Ranger's tail wagged once. Marcus pulled on the indentation, but the boards didn't budge. He tried again, putting his back into it, and felt something shift. The wood groaned, protesting. But then with a sharp crack, the entire section lifted up on hidden hinges, revealing a dark space below. Cold air rushed up from the opening, carrying with it the smell of earth and something metallic. Marcus shined his flashlight down into the darkness. A ladder, old and wooden, descended about 8 feet into what looked like a small chamber carved directly into the stone of the ridge. The walls were rough-hewn rock, and at the bottom, Marcus could see the edge of something metal reflecting the light. "What the hell?" he whispered. Ranger whined, pressing closer to the opening, clearly wanting to go down. "Hold on," Marcus said. "Let me check it first." He tested the ladder with one hand, applying pressure to the top rung. It held. The wood was old but dry, protected from the elements by the hatch above. Marcus took a breath, steadied himself against the rising surge of claustrophobia. Tight spaces always brought back the memory of rubble and screaming in Fallujah, and started down. The ladder held his weight. Ranger watched from above, whining softly. At the bottom, Marcus's boots hit stone. The chamber was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with a ceiling just high enough for him to stand upright. And there, against the far wall, sat a metal vault. It was military-grade, painted olive drab, with stenciled letters across the front that had faded but were still readable. U.S. Army property. Authorized personnel only. Marcus's hands started shaking. Not from fear, but from something else. Recognition, disbelief, the electric shock of stumbling into something that changed everything. The vault had a combination lock, old style, with 4 rotating dials. Below the lock, someone had scratched numbers into the metal with a knife or screwdriver. 0 to 6, 2 to 5. June 25th, the date the Korean War started. Marcus's grandfather had fought in Korea, had come home with nightmares and a Bronze Star he kept in a drawer and never talked about. Marcus remembered him vaguely from childhood, a quiet man who smoked hand-rolled cigarettes and stared at the mountains like they held answers to questions no one else was asking. Above him, Ranger barked, sharp and urgent. "I'm coming," Marcus called up. He climbed the ladder quickly, emerging back into the cabin. Ranger was standing at the broken doorway, hackles raised, growling low in his chest. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and moved to the door. Outside, in the falling snow, he saw them, fresh tire tracks cutting through the clearing, leading right up to the cabin. Someone had been here. Recently, while Marcus was down in the chamber, and they'd left something behind. Nailed to the porch post was a piece of paper, already dusted with snow. Marcus pulled it free and read the message scrawled in black marker. "Leave now. This land isn't yours. You've been warned." Ranger's growl deepened, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of an engine faded into the night. Marcus crumpled the note in his fist, jaw tight. He'd been pushed around enough for one lifetime. By officers who didn't care, by a VA system that failed him, by a wife who left when the nightmares got too bad, by a society that thanked him for his service and then forgot he existed. Not anymore. "Ranger," he said quietly, voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "We're not going anywhere." The dog stopped growling and looked up at him, ears forward, waiting for orders. Marcus stared out into the dark forest, snow swirling in the beam of his flashlight. Somewhere out there, someone knew about the vault. Someone who didn't want him here. Someone who thought fear and intimidation would be enough to make him run. They were wrong. He'd survived worse than threats in the night. He'd survived firefights and IEDs and the long, dark months after coming home when death seemed like a mercy. He'd survived because Ranger wouldn't let him quit, because some stubborn part of him refused to break, because he was Marcus Reed and he didn't run from fights he didn't start. "Come on," he said to Ranger. "Let's get some sleep. Tomorrow we figure out what's in that vault." He closed the hatch carefully, dragged his sleeping bag over the top of it, and settled in with Ranger curled against his side. Outside, the wind screamed and the snow fell harder, burying the world in white silence. But Marcus barely slept. His mind kept turning back to the vault, to the numbers scratched into the metal, to his grandfather's face in the one photograph his mother had kept, a young man in uniform, standing in front of mountains that looked a lot like these. By the time dawn broke, gray and cold, Marcus had made his decision. He was going to open that vault, and whatever was inside was going to change everything. The morning came slow and hostile, the kind of cold that seeped through every layer and settled in the bones. Marcus woke with Ranger's warm bulk pressed against his side, the dog's breathing the only sound in the silent cabin. Through the gaps in the walls, pale light filtered in, revealing the true extent of the damage in harsh detail. Marcus sat up slowly, his back protesting. Sleeping on the floor brought back too many memories of patrol bases and sleeping on cots that felt like concrete. Ranger lifted his head, ears already alert, scanning for threats even before fully awake. "Morning, buddy," Marcus said quietly. The dog's tail thumped once against the sleeping bag. Marcus fired up the camp stove and made instant coffee, the bitter smell cutting through the damp cold. While the water heated, he walked to the hatch and stared down at it. The vault waited below, silent and patient, holding secrets that had been buried for 70 years. But first, he needed to understand what he was dealing with. He pulled out his phone. No service this far up the ridge, of course, and scrolled through the photos he'd taken yesterday at the county records office. The deed to the property listed the previous owner as Thomas Pritchard, deceased 2019, no heirs. Before that, the chain of ownership went back through several hands. None of the names familiar, until 1953, when the property had been purchased by someone named James Coltrane. Marcus froze. James Coltrane, his mother's maiden name. He scrolled through his contacts and found his mother's number. The call went straight to voicemail. She'd be at work already, teaching 3rd grade in Spokane, 400 miles away. He left a message. "Mom, it's Marcus. I need to ask you about Grandpa's service in Korea, and about someone named James Coltrane. Call me when you can." Ranger stood and stretched, then moved to the door and whined. "Yeah, I know. Let's get you outside." They stepped out into a world transformed by snow. 6 inches had fallen overnight, blanketing the clearing in white, softening the harsh lines of the collapsed cabin. The mountains rose around them like cathedral walls, silent and ancient, watching everything. Ranger did his business quickly, then immediately started tracking again, nose to the ground, moving in widening circles. The dog stopped suddenly near the tree line, hackles rising. Marcus followed, hand instinctively reaching for the knife on his belt, the only weapon he'd kept after leaving the service. In the snow, he saw what had triggered Ranger's response. Boot prints, multiple sets, leading from the trees to the cabin, then back again. They'd been here during the night. Not just a single visitor leaving a warning, but at least 3 people, based on the different tread patterns. They'd circled the cabin, stopped at each window, and stood for a long time near the front door. Watching, waiting. Marcus's jaw tightened. Ranger pressed against his leg, a solid reminder that he wasn't alone. "They want to scare us," Marcus said quietly. "Make us think we're outnumbered. Vulnerable." Ranger looked up at him with eyes that had seen combat, that understood threat assessment better than most humans. "But we've faced worse, haven't we?" The dog's tail wagged once, a brief acknowledgement. They went back inside. Marcus heated another can of soup for breakfast, shared it with Ranger, then made his decision. The vault wasn't going to open itself, and whoever was leaving threatening notes in the night clearly didn't want him finding what was inside, which meant it was worth finding. He gathered his tools, a flashlight, a pry bar, a hammer, and a notepad. Then he opened the hatch and descended into the chamber with Ranger following carefully behind him, the dog's claws clicking on the wooden rungs. At the bottom, Marcus approached the vault. In the daylight filtering down from above, he could see more details. The metal was pitted with age and moisture, but structurally sound. The lock was a 4-dial combination mechanism, standard military issue from the 1950s. The scratch numbers stared at him, 0-6-2-5. Marcus set each dial carefully, the mechanism clicking softly with each rotation. When the final number locked into place, he held his breath and turned the handle. Nothing. He tried again, double-checking each number. Still nothing. Ranger whined softly, sensing his frustration. June 25, 1950, Marcus muttered. "That's got to mean something." He tried different combinations, 2-5-0-6, 5-0-6-2, but the lock refused to open. After 20 minutes, he sat back on his heels, thinking. His grandfather never talked about Korea. Never talked about what he'd seen, what he'd done, why he'd come home with eyes that seemed to look through people instead of at them. The only time Marcus remembered him being angry was when someone at a 4th of July barbecue had thanked him for his service. His grandfather had stood up, walked away, and didn't come back. What had he said once, when Marcus was young? Something about numbers, about dates being less important than people. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened the photo album. His grandfather's grave marker. He'd taken a picture of it at the funeral 5 years ago, one of the last times he'd seen his mother before the divorce consumed his life. James Robert Coltrane, Sergeant, U.S. Army, February 14, 1931 to August 8, 2016. February 14th, 02-14. Marcus set the dials, 0-2-1-4. The lock clicked. The handle turned. The vault door swung open with a groan of protesting metal that had been sealed for decades. Cold air rushed out, carrying with it the smell of old paper and metal and time. Marcus shined his flashlight inside. Gold bars, stacked neatly on wooden shelves, each one stamped with markings he recognized from his military training. U.S. Treasury. 1950, 10 troy ounces. Marcus's hands started shaking. He counted quickly, 20 bars per shelf, 6 shelves. 120 bars total. 1,200 troy ounces of gold. At current prices, that was over $2 million. Ranger pushed past him, sniffing at the bars, then lost interest and focused on something else in the vault, a metal box sitting on the bottom shelf. Marcus pulled it out carefully. Inside was a bundle of papers wrapped in oilcloth, protected from moisture and time. He unfolded them slowly. Letters, written in his grandfather's handwriting, addressed to someone named Thomas Pritchard. The first letter was dated July 1953. Tom, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back. The gold is yours to protect until my family needs it. Don't let the army find it. Don't let anyone find it. What we did in Chosin wasn't theft, it was survival. We earned every ounce with blood. Tell my son I'm sorry. Tell him the nightmares are worth it if it means he never has to carry a rifle. Jim. Marcus's vision blurred. He read the letter again, then again, his grandfather's voice echoing through the words. Chosin Reservoir. One of the bloodiest battles of the Korean War. 16 days of sub-zero fighting against overwhelming Chinese forces. His grandfather had been there, and he'd come home with gold. The rest of the papers told the story in fragments. Transfer orders. Death certificates of soldiers who'd died at Chosin. A ledger showing Chinese gold reserves captured during a desperate retreat. And a final letter from Thomas Pritchard, dated 2018, written in shaking handwriting. To whoever inherits this property. James Coltrane was my best friend. He saved my life at Chosin and asked me to hide this gold until his family needed it. I've kept that promise for 65 years. The gold was taken from a Chinese convoy, spoils of war, not theft. It belongs to Jim's family. It belongs to you. But others know about it. The army never stopped looking. And there are men in this town who've searched for decades. Be careful. They'll kill to keep this secret buried. Thomas Pritchard. Marcus sat back against the stone wall, the letters trembling in his hands. His grandfather had fought at Chosin, had survived, had brought home enough gold to change lives, and then had buried it, protecting it, waiting for the right time, the right person, waiting for someone like Marcus. Ranger pressed close, sensing the emotional storm building in his chest. Marcus wrapped an arm around the dog, holding tight as tears he hadn't let himself cry in years finally broke free. He left this for us, Marcus whispered. Grandpa left this for his family. For me. Ranger licked his face, patient and steady. Above them, a sound. Footsteps on the porch. Heavy boots, multiple sets, spreading out to surround the cabin. Marcus's head snapped up. Ranger was already growling, body tense, ready for orders. Then a voice, rough and commanding, cut through the morning air. Marcus Reed, come out slowly with your hands visible. You're on private property, and we're authorized to use force. Marcus's pulse spiked. He moved to the ladder, climbed halfway up, and peered through the gap in the hatch. 3 men stood in the clearing, dressed in heavy winter coats, each carrying a rifle. Not hunting rifles. AR-15s. The kind of weapons that meant business. The man in front was older, maybe 60, with a face carved from stone and eyes that had seen violence and didn't flinch from it. He stood with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. We know you found something, the man called out. And we know you can't leave this mountain without going through us. So let's make this simple. Walk away now, and you live. Stay, and we bury you next to Thomas Pritchard. Marcus's jaw clenched. Every instinct screamed at him to fight, to defend what was his. But 3 armed men against a veteran with a knife and a dog, the math didn't work. Ranger growled louder, ready to attack on command. Easy, Marcus whispered. Not yet. He climbed fully out of the chamber, standing in the middle of the cabin where the men could see him through the broken walls. He raised his hand slowly. I'm coming out. Unarmed, the man ordered. I'm unarmed. Marcus stepped through the doorway onto the porch, Ranger at his side, every muscle in the dog's body coiled like a spring. The three men kept their rifles pointed at center mass, trained shooters, not amateurs. The older man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Smart choice. Now, where's the vault? Marcus met his gaze. I don't know what you're talking about. Wrong answer. The man nodded to one of his companions, who raised his rifle and aimed it directly at Ranger's head. Maybe your dog knows. Everything in Marcus went cold and sharp. His voice, when he spoke, came out flat and deadly calm. You point that weapon at my dog, and I promise you won't leave this mountain alive. The man with the rifle hesitated, glancing at his leader. The older man studied Marcus with new interest. You're a veteran. I can tell. Iraq? Afghanistan? Both. Then you understand reality. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and isolated. We can make this easy, or we can make it permanent. Your choice. Marcus's hands were still raised, but his mind was racing through tactical options. Distance to nearest cover, 12 feet. Ranger's attack speed, under 2 seconds to close 5 feet. Rifle muzzle velocity, 2,900 feet per second. No chance of dodging. But if he could get them talking, create an opening. Who are you? Marcus asked. Daniel Sutton. I own half the businesses in Timber Falls, and I've been searching for that gold since before you were born. It's not yours. It was never your grandfather's either. Stolen Chinese gold doesn't belong to anyone. Spoils of war, Marcus said. That's what the letters say. Sutton's expression darkened. You read the letters. Every word. Then you know this ends one way. Sutton lowered his voice, almost gentle. Your grandfather stole that gold. Thomas Pritchard hid it. And now you're going to show us where it is, or we're going to tear this cabin apart until we find it. Ranger's growl turned into a snarl. Call off your dog, Sutton ordered. He doesn't take orders when threats are being made. Then I'll shoot him first, and you second. Marcus's vision narrowed to a point. The world reduced to 3 heartbeats, his own, Ranger's, and the moment before violence erupted. He'd been here before, in alleys in Fallujah, in ambushes outside Kandahar, in the space between life and death where decisions were made in fractions of seconds. And he'd learned something in those moments that most people never understood. Sometimes the only way to survive was to make the other side believe you were crazier than they were. Marcus smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that came from a place beyond fear. You want the gold? He said quietly. Come and take it. Then he dropped his hands and whistled sharply. Ranger exploded forward. The clearing erupted in chaos. Ranger moved like a guided missile, 90 pounds of muscle and training launched at the nearest gunman with terrifying precision. The man tried to swing his rifle around, but the dog was already inside his reach, jaws clamping onto the forearm holding the weapon. The man screamed. The rifle clattered to the snow. Marcus dove left, rolling behind a pile of debris as gunfire cracked through the morning air. Splinters exploded from the wood where his head had been a second earlier. He came up in a crouch, grabbed a broken 2x4, and charged. Sutton tracked him with the rifle, finger tightening on the trigger. And Marcus swung the board like a baseball bat, connecting with the barrel just as the shot fired. The round went wide, punching through a tree 20 feet away. Marcus followed through, driving his shoulder into Sutton's chest, taking both of them down into the snow. They hit hard. Sutton's rifle flew from his grip. Marcus tried to pin him, but the older man was stronger than he looked, twisting with brutal efficiency and slamming an elbow into Marcus's jaw. Stars exploded across his vision. The third gunman had recovered from Ranger's initial assault and was raising his weapon. Ranger released the first man and launched at the new threat, hitting him in the chest like a freight train. The gunman went down backward, Ranger on top of him, teeth snapping inches from his throat. Ranger, hold! Marcus shouted. The dog froze, jaws locked in a snarl, pinning the man to the ground without biting. Perfect control. Perfect training. Marcus rolled off Sutton and grabbed the nearest rifle, bringing it up just as Sutton pulled a pistol from his coat. They faced each other across 6 feet of snow, both armed, both breathing hard. Drop it, Marcus ordered. Sutton smiled through bloody teeth. You won't shoot. You don't know me. I know veterans. I know the VA taught you rules of engagement. I know you hesitate. Marcus's finger moved to the trigger. You're betting your life I'm stable enough to follow rules. That made Sutton pause. Here's the truth, Marcus continued. voice steady despite his racing heart. I've got PTSD. I've got nightmares that wake me up screaming. I've got a dog who has to pull me back from flashbacks where I'm 18 again and watching my friends burn alive in a Humvee. So yeah, maybe I'm not stable. Maybe I'm exactly the kind of person who'll put a bullet in you and sleep just fine afterward. The first gunman, clutching his bloody arm, spoke up. Daniel, he's serious. Shut up, Sutton snapped. But his pistol lowered slightly. Marcus didn't lower the rifle. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to put that pistol in the snow. Your men are going to do the same with their weapons. And then you're all going to walk off this mountain and never come back. That gold is worth millions. It's not yours. It's not yours either. Wrong. Marcus's voice hardened. My grandfather earned it with blood at Chosin Reservoir. He trusted Thomas Pritchard to keep it safe. Pritchard trusted whoever inherited this land. That's me. So yeah, it's mine. And you're trespassing on my property with weapons, making threats, and assaulting me and my dog. That's felony territory. You really want to bet your freedom on taking that gold by force. Sutton's jaw worked, rage and calculation battling behind his eyes. Then, slowly, he set his pistol in the snow. Smart choice, Marcus said. Now the rest of you. The other two men dropped their rifles. Ranger off. The dog released the pinned gunman and trotted back to Marcus's side, blood on his muzzle, but eyes bright and alert. He'd done his job. Perfectly. Marcus kept the rifle trained on Sutton. Start walking. This isn't over, Sutton said. Yeah, it is. Because when you get back to town, you're going to think about what I said. About me being unstable. About me having nothing left to lose. And you're going to realize that coming back up this mountain means risking your life for gold you might never get. The law doesn't care about your claim to stolen Chinese gold from 70 years ago, but it will care about armed trespass and assault. So walk away, Daniel, while you still can. For a long moment, Sutton didn't move. Then he turned and started walking. His men followed, the injured one cradling his arm, leaving bloody footprints in the snow. Marcus watched until they disappeared into the trees. Only then did he lower the rifle, hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. The adrenaline crash hit like a freight train, his knees buckling. He caught himself on the porch post, gasping for air, the world spinning. Ranger pressed against him immediately, warm and solid and real. I got you, buddy, Marcus whispered. You did good. You did so good. The dog licked his face, tail wagging. Marcus slid down to sit on the porch, Ranger in his lap despite being far too big, both of them trembling in the aftermath. This was the part civilians didn't understand, the after. When the body realized how close death had been. When the brain tried to process what had almost happened. But he'd survived. They'd survived. And the gold was still here. He sat there for 10 minutes, maybe 20, letting the shaking subside. Finally, his phone buzzed. A text from his mother. James Coltrane was my father. Why are you asking about him? Marcus typed back with numb fingers. Because I found what he left us. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. What are you talking about? Call me. It's important. The phone rang 30 seconds later. Marcus answered. Mom. Marcus, what's going on? You're scaring me. He took a breath. I bought a cabin up on Coldwater Ridge. Grandpa owned this land before he died. And he left something here. Something from Korea. He died 5 years ago. I know. But he left instructions for Thomas Pritchard to keep it safe until family needed it. Mom. His voice cracked. It's gold. From the war. Enough to change everything. Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, how much? Over $2 million. He heard her sit down, the sound of a chair scraping across linoleum. Oh my God, but there's a problem. Men came here. Tried to take it. Said Grandpa stole it. Did he? Marcus looked at the letters in his hand, his grandfather's words written in the steady script of a soldier who'd seen hell and come home broken. He survived Chosin Reservoir. He earned it. His mother was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. He never talked about it. Not once. I asked him when I was in high school, and he just walked away. Like the question hurt too much to even hear. I know. What are you going to do? Marcus stared out at the mountains, at the snow-covered ridge that had held this secret for 70 years. I'm going to protect it, the way Grandpa wanted. And then I'm going to use it to help veterans who need it. Marcus, I know it's a lot of money. I know I could disappear, live easy, never worry again. But Grandpa didn't bring this home so his grandson could live in a beach house somewhere. He brought it home because he knew war destroys people, because he knew veterans would need help, because he couldn't save everyone at Chosin, but maybe his family could save someone later. Ranger nudged his hand, and Marcus scratched behind the dog's ear. I'm going to build something here, Marcus continued. A place for veterans like me. A place where they can heal. Where dogs like Ranger can help them the way he helped me. And I'm going to name it after Grandpa. The Coltrane Veterans Sanctuary. His mother was crying now. He could hear it in her breathing. He would have loved that. Yeah, I think he would. Be careful, Marcus. If men are already coming after it, I'll handle it. I've got Ranger. And I've got something else now. What? Purpose. After they hung up, Marcus sat on the porch for another hour, watching the sun climb higher, burning off the morning mist. Ranger dozed beside him, exhausted from the fight but content. Finally, Marcus stood. There was work to do. First, he secured the vault, closing it and covering the hatch with debris to make it less obvious. Then he gathered Sutton's abandoned rifles, evidence, if he needed it, and locked them in his truck. By afternoon, he was hiking down to where his phone had service, calling every number he could find. A lawyer, the county sheriff, a VA advocate he'd met years ago. Each call was the same message. I need help. I found something, and people are going to try to take it. The sheriff arrived that evening, a weathered man named Tom Havers who'd seen his share of mountain disputes. Marcus showed him the threatening note, the boot prints, the abandoned rifles, and told him about the confrontation. Daniel Sutton's been a problem for years, Havers said, writing in his notebook. But he's connected. Town council, business owners, half the county commissioners. You're making a powerful enemy. I didn't start this. No, but you're in it now. Havers closed his notebook. I'll document everything. File a report. But unless you want to press charges for armed trespass. I do. Havers raised an eyebrow. You sure? That'll bring this into the open. Lawyers, courts, publicity. Whatever you found up here, it'll become public knowledge. Marcus thought about the gold sitting beneath the cabin floor. About his grandfather's letters. About Thomas Pritchard's warning that others knew about it. It's going to come out anyway, he said. At least this way it's on my terms. All right then. Havers nodded. I'll start the paperwork. In the meantime, you watch yourself up here. Sutton's not the kind to let this go. After the sheriff left, Marcus made one more call. To the lawyer, Rachel Ward, who'd helped him with his discharge papers when the VA had tried to deny his benefits. She answered on the third ring. Marcus Reed. Been a while. I need help. Of course you do. What kind of trouble are you in this time? He told her. Everything. The cabin, the gold, his grandfather's letters, Sutton's attack. When he finished, there was a long silence. Jesus, Rachel finally said. You don't do anything small, do you? Can you help? Gold from the Korean War. She exhaled slowly. That's complicated. Legally, military personnel weren't allowed to bring back war souvenirs worth more than a certain amount. But the statute of limitations expired decades ago. And if it was truly spoils of war, taken from enemy forces, there's precedent for veterans keeping such items. So it's mine. Probably. But proving it means going public. Filing claims. Dealing with the Army's Historical Records Division. Maybe even the Chinese government if they get wind of it. What about Sutton? I'll file for a restraining order tomorrow. Document the threats, the assault, everything. If he comes near you again, he'll be in contempt. He's not the type to care about court orders. Then you need protection. Have you thought about security? Marcus looked at Ranger, who'd been lying nearby, but was now sitting up, ears alert, watching the tree line. I've got Ranger. A dog isn't enough, Marcus. He's not just a dog. He's a combat veteran. And he saved my life more times than I can count. Rachel sighed. Fine, but keep your phone charged. And if anything happens, anything, you call me immediately. I will. And Marcus? Don't do anything stupid. Too late for that. After he hung up, darkness had fully settled over the ridge. Marcus built a fire in the old wood stove. It still worked, surprisingly, and heated another can of soup. He shared it with Ranger, both of them eating in silence while the wind howled outside. That night, Marcus didn't sleep. He sat with his back against the wall, one of Sutton's rifles across his lap, watching the doorway. Ranger dozed fitfully, waking every hour to check the perimeters, then settling again. Around 3 in the morning, Marcus heard it. The soft crunch of footsteps in snow. Not trying to be quiet, but not announcing themselves either. Ranger was up instantly, hackles raised. Marcus stood slowly, rifle ready. Through the broken walls, he saw lights moving through the trees. Not flashlights, headlights. Multiple vehicles approaching from different directions, surrounding the cabin. They were coming back. And this time, they brought reinforcements. Marcus's jaw tightened. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to grab Ranger and disappear into the mountains before they arrived. But running meant abandoning the gold. Abandoning his grandfather's legacy. Abandoning the future he'd glimpsed for the first time in years. So he stood his ground. The vehicle stopped at the tree line. Doors opened. Footsteps approached. And then a voice cut through the darkness. Not Sutton's, but someone else. Younger. Unfamiliar. Marcus Reed. This is Sheriff's Deputy Jake Morrison. I'm here with a federal agent. We need to talk. Marcus blinked. Federal agent? Ranger's growl softened slightly, confused. How do I know you're really a deputy? Marcus called out. Because I'm turning on my roof lights right now. A moment later, blue and red flashed through the clearing. Official. Real. Marcus lowered the rifle slightly, but didn't set it down. Come forward slowly. One at a time. A young man in a sheriff's uniform stepped into the firelight spilling from the cabin. Behind him came a woman in a dark suit. FBI credentials held up where Marcus could see them. Agent Sarah Chun, she said. Army Criminal Investigation Division forwarded your lawyer's inquiry to us. We need to talk about what you found. Marcus kept the rifle pointed at the ground, but ready. Why? Because 6 months ago, we were contacted by the Chinese government regarding missing gold reserves from the Korean War. They've been searching for it for 70 years. Marcus's blood went cold. Chun continued, her voice steady and professional. They know it's somewhere in this region, and they're offering a $10 million reward for information leading to its recovery. 10 million. Enough to make people kill. Enough to make this cabin a target for every treasure hunter, mercenary, and desperate person in the Pacific Northwest. We're here to help you, Chun said. But we need to secure that gold before someone else tries to take it by force. Marcus looked at Ranger, who was watching the agent with sharp, analytical eyes. The dog's instincts would tell them if she was lying. Ranger's tail wagged once. Cautiously, not a threat. Marcus lowered the rifle completely. All right, let's talk. Agent Chun and Deputy Morrison stepped into the cabin carefully, their eyes taking in the collapsed roof, the debris, the makeshift camp Marcus had set up. Chun's gaze lingered on Ranger, who sat perfectly still at Marcus's side, watching every movement. Former military working dog. Chun asked. Yes, ma'am. Ranger. 3 deployments. Explosive detection specialist. Chun nodded with evident respect. I worked with K-9 units in Afghanistan. Good dogs. That small acknowledgement shifted something in Marcus's chest. She understood. That made her less of a threat. Morrison pulled out a tablet, tapping through screens. We received your lawyer's filing about the gold this afternoon. Army CID flagged it immediately and contacted us. The Chinese government submitted a formal request for assistance in 2023, claiming approximately 1,200 troy ounces of gold was stolen from a military convoy during the Chosin Reservoir campaign. It wasn't stolen, Marcus said quietly. It was spoils of war. Chun's expression softened. I read your grandfather's letters. Your lawyer forwarded copies. Sergeant James Coltrane, Bronze Star recipient, survivor of Chosin. I'm not here to dishonor his service. Then why are you here? Because that gold's existence is now in multiple databases. Chinese intelligence, Army CID, FBI Financial Crimes Unit. And as of this afternoon, a federal court filing that's public record. Which means everyone knows about it, Marcus finished. Everyone who's looking. And that includes people far more dangerous than Daniel Sutton. Marcus sat down heavily on his sleeping bag, suddenly exhausted. Ranger pressed against him, warm and steady. Morrison spoke up. We've already identified 3 separate inquiries about this property in the last 6 hours. One from a private military contractor with ties to international antiquities trafficking. One from a Beijing-based law firm representing the Chinese government. And one from a group we can't identify, but who used Tor routing and encrypted communications. You're saying I painted a target on my back? Yes, Chun said bluntly. But you did the right thing. Trying to hide this would have been worse. At least now we can protect you legally. How? Chun pulled out a folder, spreading documents across the makeshift table. First, we establish legal ownership. Your grandfather's service records show he was at Chosin Reservoir. His unit encountered a Chinese convoy during the retreat. The convoy was destroyed. Any material recovered from that convoy is legally considered spoils of war under the 1949 Geneva Conventions. So it's mine. Probably. But the Chinese government will argue it was stolen civilian property, not military assets. They'll sue in international court. It'll take years to resolve. Marcus's jaw tightened. I don't have years. I know. Which is why we're proposing an alternative. Morrison pulled up a document on his tablet. The Department of Veterans Affairs has a fund for emergency assistance to at-risk veterans. If you were to donate a portion of the gold to that fund, say 30%, the VA would classify the rest as a personal asset protected under veteran benefit laws. 30% is over $600,000, Marcus said. And it would help thousands of veterans, Chen added gently. It would also give you legal cover. The Chinese government can't touch assets designated for veteran services. It's explicitly protected under international agreements the U.S. has with China. Marcus looked down at Ranger, whose brown eyes met his with perfect trust. The dog had no opinion on money or politics. He only cared that Marcus was safe. What about the rest? Marcus asked. You keep it. Use it however you want. Build your sanctuary. Live comfortably. Invest it. Whatever you choose. It was more money than Marcus had ever imagined having. Even after giving away 30%, he'd have enough to build something real. Something lasting. There's one more thing, Chen said. Daniel Sutton filed a claim this afternoon, asserting that Thomas Pritchard promised him the location of the gold before he died. He's saying he has legal rights to it. Marcus's hands clenched. That's a lie. Probably. But he filed in civil court, which means it'll tie you up in lawsuits for months if not years. Unless what? Unless we can prove his claim is fraudulent. Which means we need to talk to people who knew Thomas Pritchard. Find evidence that he never made such a promise. Discredit Sutton before this goes to trial. Marcus thought about Betty Hansen at the general store. About Sheriff Havers, who'd known Pritchard for years. About the scattered community of people who lived on the ridge and kept their own counsel. I can do that, he said. You'll need help, Chen replied. Sutton has money. Lawyers. Connections. He'll bury you in paperwork and legal fees until you're forced to settle. I have a lawyer. Rachel Ward. I know. She's good. But she's one person. You need more. Morrison leaned forward. The VA has legal advocates specifically for situations like this. Veterans being exploited or threatened over benefits or property. I can connect you with them. Marcus studied the two of them. The FBI agent with her calm professionalism. The young deputy with his earnest determination to help. They weren't enemies. They were offering protection, support, the kind of help he'd stopped believing existed. Why? He asked quietly. Why do you care about one veteran and a pile of gold? Chen's expression shifted, something personal flickering behind the professional mask. My father was at Chosin, 1st Marine Division. He came home with frostbite, so bad he lost 3 toes. He never talked about it. Never claimed disability. Never asked for help. Her voice caught. He died 5 years ago, broke and alone. And I've spent every day since wondering if I could have done something. So yeah, I care. Because maybe helping you means I can do for someone else what I couldn't do for him. The cabin was silent except for the crackling fire and the wind outside. Marcus extended his hand. Then let's do this. Chen shook it firmly. First thing tomorrow, we secure the gold. Transport it to a federal facility for safekeeping during the legal proceedings. You'll get a full inventory, documented chain of custody, everything legal and clean. I want to be there when it's moved. Absolutely. It's your property. You have every right to witness the process. Morrison stood. I'll coordinate with Sheriff Havers. We'll bring in additional deputies to secure the site overnight. Make sure Sutton doesn't try anything before we can get the gold out. As they prepared to leave, Chen paused at the door. You did good, Marcus. Your grandfather would be proud. After they left, Marcus sat by the fire with Ranger curled against his side. The dog's breathing was steady, peaceful, trusting that his human had made the right choice. What do you think, buddy? Marcus whispered. Did I just save us or make everything worse? Ranger huffed softly and licked his hand. Outside, vehicle engine started, then faded down the mountain. Within an hour, new vehicles arrived. Sheriff's deputies setting up a perimeter, their presence a visible deterrent to anyone thinking about approaching the cabin. For the first time since buying this property, Marcus felt something that wasn't fear or desperation. He felt protected. That night, he slept. Not well. The nightmares still came, flashes of Fallujah mixed with images of Chinese soldiers he'd never actually fought. But Ranger was there each time, pulling him back to reality with gentle nudges and warm breath. By morning, the sun rose over Coldwater Ridge in brilliant gold, painting the snow in colors that matched the metal sitting in the vault below. Marcus stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the lights spread across the valley. Ranger sat beside him, tail wagging slowly. "We're going to be okay," Marcus said. "I think we're actually going to be okay." The dog barked once, agreeing. The convoy arrived at 10 in the morning, 3 black SUVs and an armored truck, all bearing federal government plates. Agent Chen stepped out of the lead vehicle, accompanied by 2 men in tactical gear and a woman carrying specialized equipment. Marcus watched from the porch, Ranger alert at his side. "Mr. Reed," Chen called out. "We're ready when you are." Marcus descended the steps slowly. His heart hammered against his ribs, not from fear, but from the finality of what was about to happen. Once that gold left this mountain, everything changed. There would be no going back to anonymity, no disappearing into the shadows. His life, his story, his grandfather's legacy, all of it would become public. But hiding hadn't worked. Hiding had gotten Thomas Pritchard killed. Hiding had forced his grandfather to bury the truth for 70 years. Marcus was done hiding. "Let's do this," he said. Inside the cabin, the crew worked with military precision. They photographed the hatch from every angle, documenting its condition and location. Then Marcus opened it, revealing the chamber below. Chun descended first, followed by the specialist with the equipment. Marcus and Ranger came last. In the close confines of the chamber, the vault looked smaller than Marcus remembered. Chun ran her gloved hands over the metal, examining the lock mechanism, the scratched numbers, the faded army stencils. "This is authentic," she said softly. 1950s Army field vault, probably used for payroll or classified documents during the war. The specialist set up a portable scale and camera. "We'll weigh and photograph each bar individually. Full chain of custody documentation." Marcus nodded. "I want copies of everything." "You'll get them." It took 3 hours to inventory the gold. 120 bars, each stamped with U.S. Treasury markings and dated 1950. Total weight, 1,203 troy ounces. Current market value, $2,460,000. Marcus watched them load the bars into specialized containers, each one sealed and marked with evidence tags. His grandfather's legacy, reduced to numbered containers in the back of an armored truck. But it wasn't reduced. It was preserved, protected, given the legitimacy it deserved. When the last bar was loaded, Chun handed Marcus a receipt. "Official federal custody. You'll receive regular updates on its status. And once the legal issues are resolved, it's yours to do with as you choose. Minus 30% for the VA fund. If you agree to that arrangement, yes." Marcus signed the paperwork without hesitation. $600,000 for veterans in crisis. $1.8 million for the sanctuary he was going to build. It was more than enough. The convoy departed mid-afternoon, leaving Marcus and Ranger alone on the ridge once more. The cabin felt emptier now, the chamber below just a dark hole in the ground instead of a secret vault full of possibility. But Marcus didn't feel empty. He felt lighter. He spent the rest of the day cleaning up the cabin properly, making plans. The collapsed section would need to be demolished and rebuilt. The foundation reinforced. New roof, new walls, proper insulation. It would cost money, but he'd have money soon. By evening, another visitor arrived. Rachel Ward, his lawyer, climbed out of a rental car with a briefcase and a determined expression. "I leave you alone for 2 days, and you start a federal case," she said by way of greeting. Marcus smiled. "I'm efficient." They sat at the makeshift table while Rachel spread out documents. "Daniel Sutton's claim is a problem. He's filed in civil court asserting that Thomas Pritchard entered into a verbal agreement with him in 2018, promising him the rights to any valuable property found on this land. That's bullshit. Probably. But verbal contracts are legally binding in Montana if there's evidence they existed. We need to prove Pritchard never made such an agreement." "How?" "Witnesses. Anyone who knew Pritchard well enough to testify about his character and intentions. Anyone who heard him talk about this property or what he planned to do with it. Marcus thought about Betty Hansen, about Sheriff Havers, about the handful of people who'd lived on the ridge long enough to remember when Pritchard was still alive. "I'll talk to them," he said. "Good. Because Sutton's lawyers are good. They're already deposing everyone they can find. If we don't move fast, they'll control the narrative." Rachel pulled out another document. "There's also the issue of the Chinese government's claim. They filed a formal request for the gold to be returned as stolen property. The State Department is involved now." Marcus's jaw tightened. Chun said veteran benefits would protect it. "They will, if you formalize the donation. But that means signing over 30% before the Chinese government can contest it. Once the VA has it, international law protects it. Then let's do that now." Rachel looked at him carefully. "You're sure? That's $600,000, Marcus. Life-changing money. I know exactly what it is." Marcus met her eyes. "And I know what my grandfather would want me to do with it. He didn't survive Chosin so I could live in a mansion. He survived so other veterans wouldn't have to suffer the way he did." Rachel smiled, something warm and genuine. "All right then. I'll draft the documents tonight." After she left, Marcus walked to the edge of the clearing and looked out over the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Ranger pressed against his leg, warm and solid. "You think I'm doing the right thing?" Marcus asked. Ranger looked up at him with eyes that held no judgment, no doubt. "Only trust." "Yeah," Marcus said softly. "Me too." Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus became a different kind of soldier. Instead of fighting with rifles, he fought with testimony and documents and the slow, grinding machinery of the legal system. He tracked down everyone who'd known Thomas Pritchard. Betty Hansen testified that Pritchard had told her repeatedly he was keeping something safe for Jim Coltrane's family. Sheriff Havers confirmed that Pritchard had never mentioned Daniel Sutton in connection with the property. A retired postal worker produced letters Pritchard had written to the county clerk, stating his intention to leave the property to James Coltrane's heir, whoever that may be. Each piece of evidence chipped away at Sutton's claim. Meanwhile, the VA processed Marcus's donation with surprising speed. $600,000 in gold, transferred to the Veterans Emergency Relief Fund. The news made local headlines, then regional, then national. Homeless veteran donates fortune to help fellow soldiers. The phone calls started immediately. News outlets wanting interviews. Veterans organizations offering support. Construction companies offering to help rebuild the cabin at cost. Marcus turned down the media interviews, but accepted the help. Within a month, crews were on the ridge, demolishing the collapsed sections and laying new foundations. The cabin began to transform, not into something grand, but into something solid, safe, permanent. By the time spring arrived, the legal battles were over. The judge dismissed Sutton's claim, ruling there was no credible evidence of an agreement with Pritchard. The Chinese government's request was denied based on the spoils of war precedent and the protected status of the VA donation. The gold was officially Marcus Reed's property, and he used it exactly as he'd promised. 1 year later, Marcus stood in front of a new building that sat where the collapsed cabin used to lean against the wind. The Coltrane Veterans Sanctuary wasn't large, just a main lodge with 6 private rooms, a common area with a stone fireplace, and a kennel facility for therapy dogs. But it was real. Ranger sat beside him, older now, moving a little slower, but still sharp, still loyal, still the reason Marcus had made it this far. The first guests had arrived that morning. 3 veterans and their service dogs, all of them carrying the same weight Marcus knew too well. The weight of memories that wouldn't fade, of nightmares that wouldn't quit, of a world that said, "Thank you for your service," and then looked away. But here, on Coldwater Ridge, they wouldn't be looked away from. Marcus had hired 2 full-time counselors, both veterans themselves. He'd partnered with a local therapy dog organization. He'd set up a workshop where residents could learn carpentry, mechanics, or just sit and work with their hands while the mountains watched over them. It wasn't a cure. There was no cure for what war did to people. But it was a place to heal, a place to rebuild, a place where the only judgment came from dogs who loved unconditionally. Betty Hansen arrived mid-morning, carrying a basket of homemade bread. She'd become a regular visitor, bringing food and stories and the kind of grandmotherly presence that made even the most broken veteran feel like maybe they deserved kindness. "It's beautiful," she said, looking at the lodge. "Thomas would have loved this. And your grandfather." Her voice caught. He'd be so proud. Marcus's throat tightened. I hope so. Agent Chin came next, having taken a personal day to attend the informal opening. She brought a plaque donated by the FBI's Veterans Affairs Division in honor of Sergeant James Robert Coltrane, Korean War veteran, whose sacrifice made this sanctuary possible. They mounted it beside the front door, where everyone entering would see it. By afternoon, more people had arrived. Rachel Ward, Sheriff Havers, Deputy Morrison, even some of the veterans Marcus had met through the VA. They gathered in the common area, eating Betty's bread and drinking coffee, swapping stories the way veterans do when they finally feel safe enough to remember. Ranger moved through the crowd, accepting pets and treats, his tail wagging constantly. The other service dogs followed his lead, and soon the lodge was full of the sounds of laughter and barking and something that felt almost like joy. Marcus stood at the window, watching it all, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of struggle. There would always be struggle. The nightmares still came. The flashbacks still hit. The hypervigilance never fully went away. But there was purpose now. Meaning. A reason to wake up each morning that wasn't just survival. Ranger appeared at his side, pressing his graying muzzle into Marcus's hand. We did it, buddy, Marcus whispered. We actually did it. The dog's tail thumped against the floor. Outside, snow began to fall, the first of the new winter, gentle and clean, covering the ridge in fresh white. The mountains stood eternal, holding their secrets, watching over the sanctuary that had risen from the ashes of one man's desperation and one dog's unwavering loyalty. Marcus thought about his grandfather, standing in these same mountains 70 years ago, burying gold and hope and the belief that someday, someone in his family would need it, would use it wisely, would honor the sacrifice it represented. He thought about Thomas Pritchard, keeping that secret through decades of silence, trusting that the right person would come. And he thought about Ranger, who had saved him more times than he could count, who had pulled him back from edges both literal and metaphorical, who had given him a reason to keep going when everything else said to quit. Thank you, Marcus said softly, to his grandfather, to Pritchard, to the dog beside him, to the mountains that had held this all together until the moment was right. Ranger licked his hand, patient and eternal. Behind them, someone started playing guitar. A veteran Marcus didn't know yet, fingers moving over strings with the careful precision of someone relearning how to create beauty instead of destruction. The music floated through the lodge, mixing with conversation and laughter and the crackling of the fire. It sounded like healing. It sounded like home. And on Coldwater Ridge, where a homeless veteran had once stood with nothing but a broken dog and a collapsed cabin, something new had taken root. Hope. Not the fragile, desperate hope of someone drowning, but the steady, enduring hope of someone who'd survived the worst and chosen to build something better with what remained. Marcus Reed had come to this mountain with $1,200 and a German Shepherd. He'd found $2 million in gold. But what he'd really found was something worth far more. Purpose, community, legacy, and the unshakable knowledge that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't the ones we dig up from the ground. They're the ones we build with our own hands, for people who need them most. The sun set over the ridge, painting the snow in shades of gold. And inside the Coltrane Veterans Sanctuary, the light stayed on late into the night, warm and welcoming, a beacon on the mountain for anyone who needed to find their way home.